Psychological harassment and psychological manipulation. Mind control can induce psychological and physical disorders. When an individual is targeted, the level of harassment usually begins slowly and increases with time. Anytime someone interacts with you, they can influence your thoughts and also manipulate your thoughts. Usually, people tune out the conversations around them. If you are in a crowded room and someone calls out your name, they will probably attract your attention, and the same goes for other specific words or sounds. Individuals can recall or form images. The expression "I get the visual." When someone talks about or describes a scene, you may form an image even if you have never seen what the other person is talking about or describing. An individual can come in close proximity to another individual and ask a question. If the individual hears the question, whether he is the target of the question or not, his mind can respond with an answer. The answer response can be in different forms, such as an image or sound. For example, if the question is "What does the person look like?" the individual may form an image of the person in his mind. If the question is "What is the person's name?" the individual's mind may respond with the sound of the person's name. If someone says "Leave" and slams a desk drawer or hits an object, this is a form of indirect intimidation, an indirect threat of violence. If these actions are repeated, it can become a form of conditioning. The next time a person slams a desk drawer or hits an object, the person may associate this as a threat. Classical conditioning can be used to associate different threats to different things. Fear conditioning, constant state of interrogation, indirect communication, and psychological disorders. Ivan Pavlov. The group can begin by saying the individual's name, specific words, different sounds, and use other distracting actions to attract the individual's attention. The targeted individual realizes that the group is using some form of harassment and begins to listen to the group around him. Using indirect communication, the group can insult the target, attack the individual's dignity, integrity, or self-esteem, threaten the victim, ask questions, and continue to use specific words and sounds to attract the targeted individual's attention. The indirect communication is also a form of conditioning and can lead to psychological disorders in which the victim feels that he is in a constant state of interrogation. For example, the individual may go to a different environment and hear sounds, words, and questions. Because of the indirect communication and conditioning, the individual may feel that he is still in a state of interrogation and believe that individuals are trying to interact with him. Normally, people would usually simply tune out the sounds and conversations of other people. This tactic is also used to induce paranoia. Constant state of interrogation, unfinished ambiguities, frustration, and negative conditioning. The constant state of interrogation can also be used or combined with unfinished ambiguities. The constant state of interrogation tactic involves constant distractions and indirect questions, and this can be combined with unfinished ambiguities. For example, "His work is," "He thinks he's," "He thinks his." This leaves the victim guessing or wondering what, and it can induce frustration or uncertainty. It can also be used to negatively condition a person as to always assume the worst or negativity from ambiguities, negative conditioning. Conditioned sounds, hitting sounds, and fear conditioning. Ivan Pavlov. Hitting sounds can affect the nervous system and can also cause or increase the fight or flight phenomenon. One tactic is to hit things or drop things randomly, the smoke screen, and then to start hitting things when threats are made towards you or indirectly. This can be an attempt to increase the reaction that you have about the threat and to condition the. One tactic is to hit things or drop things randomly, the smoke screen, and then to start hitting things when threats are made towards you or indirectly. This can be an attempt to increase the reaction that you have about the threat and to condition the affect you experience from it, such as feeling threatened or fear, with hitting sounds. Hitting sounds are linked to physical violence, so if it's used in combination with hitting sounds, the fight or flight response can be greater. Conditioned words. The identification word or trigger word. A tactic that is sometimes used on a victim is that the group doing the psychological harassment will start using a word. Different actions can also be used, that is not commonly used to identify themselves and to identify themselves as being part of this group. Because the word is now associated to a group that is psychologically attacking the victim, it can become threatening in the sense that the victim identifies an enemy, can expect a form of attack or threat, or simply identifies and associates the word to the group and the repetitive attacks and their result. The word is conditioned to a threat, the group, and a possible coming attack. Now that the victim has been conditioned to associate a threat, the group, and the attacks, to an uncommon word, a more common word is used that is conditioned and associated in the same way to the same threat, an enemy, or a possible coming attack. The word itself can also be associated to a threat, an indirect threat of physical violence. For example, or a degrading theme that is not recognized by the general public, which can increases the victim's threat response. This can destabilize the victim further by confusing them and inducing more paranoia, where the victim is wondering who is who, friend or foe, and can leave them responding more to more possible threats. The conditioned word can become what some have termed a trigger word, where the victim explodes in rage or to the threat, and physically attacks an innocent and unaware person, making them a victim of physical violence and making them both victims of this tactic, strategy, and phenomenon. Degrading themes and indirect threats. Verbal maneuvering to hide direct threats. Sometimes a lot of verbal maneuvering and planning is used to hide or reduce the visibility and obviousness of a direct threat. For example, if a group makes subtle hints or insinuations about you being a homosexual, for example, even though they probably know you are not, and then one of them says something like all homosexuals should be killed, it's an indirect threat to you because of the maneuverings, or it's less visible or obvious, but it is still a direct threat or threat aimed at you. Degrading themes are often used to prevent victims from coming forward, and this is often the way they are used in combination with a threat or threats. The victim may have some reservations about claiming that he felt personally threatened by a threat that is made towards homosexuals. Other degrading themes, ethnics, and religions can also be used. Degrading themes, inducing degrading images and intrusive thoughts. Degrading themes can be not only disturbing to a person, but also threatening. They are used to attack a person's dignity, self-image, self-esteem, induce stress, and often used in combination with negative conditioning. A group can try to make a targeted individual form degrading and perverse images by using combinations of words, descriptions, sounds, and actions. When degrading themes are used on individuals, the targeted individual can suffer from a psychological disorder that some psychologists have termed intrusive thoughts. Also, as stated on the first page, insinuations, even though they are false, can have different effects on an individual. Insinuations of being a pedophile, a homosexual, a criminal, a liar, etc., is a form of attack on a person's self-image, dignity and integrity, self-esteem, and can induce stress. One reaction that the victim can have when targeted is to have the feeling of feeling guilty of something. Pedophilia is at the top of the list in hated things in our society, and being labeled a pedophile has serious consequences. It would therefore explain why it is so often claimed to be used. When degrading themes or different insinuations are used, it can also be a form of catch-22 if a person's claims of being psychologically harassed or targeted are dismissed and they are told that it is all in their heads. Why do you have thoughts of being a pedophile, a homosexual? Why do you feel threatened by it, etc.? Given the fact that psychiatry is often used to discredit the victims of psychological harassment or psychological warfare, the psychological construction of a catch-22 may work on some of the victims. Another way degrading themes are used is to try to embarrass the victim or to repetitively humiliate the victim, because of the visible signs, such as blushing, or because of the degrading theme involved. Degrading themes are often used to try to prevent people from coming forward, and psychiatry is often used as a threat in the sense of building false profiles. Degrading themes, the pedophilia weapon. Pedophilia is one of the most hated things in our society, and because of this it can be used as a weapon. Being falsely accused or labeled of being a pedophile has very serious consequences for the victims of this phenomenon or use of pedophilia as a weapon. Even when the accusations or label are disproved at a later time, the label or smear can stick. Although the accusations are false, the desired effects on the victim are usually high levels of stress, anxiety, and fear, which is a part of the pedophilia weapon. Stress, anxiety, and fear being another form of weapon with serious effects on the body. Degrading themes, attack pattern to put the victim on the psychological defensive. Degrading themes can be used to put a person or victim on the defensive or psychological defensive. Some example of using degrading themes is to make insinuations that the victim is a criminal or a pedophile. An example of an attack pattern used in psychological harassment or psychological warfare is making insinuations that the victim is a criminal or pedophile to put the victim on the defensive, followed by threats to induce the fight or flight response or to induce fear. Psychological constructions, barriers, restrictions, and catch-22. Psychological constructions are when a condition is built into the person's psychology. One example is the term catch-22 and the use of degrading themes or pedophilia to prevent victims from coming forward or to prevent exposure. There is no catch-22, it's a psychological construction or belief that's been built into the victim to restrict or prevent the victims from exposing the perpetrators of a crime. Traverse bullshit, false pretenses, deception to prevent exposure, torture and false confession. Pretense, the psychological manipulation of, the pretense or deception of, wanting a false confession, the threat of wanting false or pretense of wanting false confessions, to prevent exposure. In other words, wanting or using the deception of wanting a false confession has the opposite or reverse effect. The victim ceases all communication or cooperation. You would believe or think that torture is used to obtain the truth, but it's actually used in many cases to do the opposite. In some cases the confessions involve the psychological construction of catch-22s or degrading themes in psychiatry or law enforcement. Subtle attacks, hidden, doubtful, uncertain, and psychological defenses. Subtle attacks are usually used to destabilize a person and to get through or bypass the person's psychological defenses. They can leave the victim unsure or uncertain on how to react or wondering if the subtle attack was intentional. The use of something personal, sensitive, or private information is usually used to destabilize the victim and to make the person feel vulnerable and insecure. Degrading themes are also used in subtle attacks. Verbal dialogue to shut down the brain when you are scared, angry, insecure, or uncertain. Your brain does not function as well. When opponents engage in verbal dialogue, they will sometimes try to intimidate, provoke, or make each other uncertain. One example is to try to throw your opponent on the defensive or psychological defensive. Linked to intimidation or manipulation, another example is to use an ambiguity to make the person uncertain. Another example is to use subtle attacks to try to provoke anger, intimidate, fear, and uncertainty. Anger makes you powerful or stronger. When psychological warfare is waged on someone, attempts are made to provoke reactions that are harmful to the victim, such as anger. Anger is the preferred reaction of choice because of the negative effects it has on the victim's health and body, such as increased adrenaline, cortisol levels, and blood pressure, and the victim can be psychologically manipulated or conditioned to react with anger or deceived into believing that this makes them more powerful or stronger. Laughter is a great stress reliever and very health. It can also diffuse threats or tense situations. Ambiguities, self-doubt and uncertainty, a state of limbo. Humans do not like ambiguities and uncertainty. We like to have certainty and security, and ambiguities are often used to induce insecurity or uncertainty. Sometimes ambiguities are used to confuse the victim and to leave them wondering what it is that they are supposed to do or be doing, or what is the intended meaning. This can affect the victim by placing them in doubt or used to induce self-doubt and uncertainty, reducing decision-making abilities, and can also have the state of limbo affect. The ambiguities can also be manipulated as to hinting at a certain meaning and then modified to hint or indicate another meaning, and so on, to keep the victim confused or guessing as to what the true meaning of the ambiguities are. This can induce confusion, frustration, and self-doubt. Ambiguities can also be used for emotional manipulation, such as inducing regret, for example. One way this is done is by hinting at a certain meaning of what the ambiguities mean, combined with very subtle hints at another and different meaning. After a period of time, the meanings can be reversed, or what was the subtle meaning can be clarified or made more obvious to the victim to induce regret, self-doubt, and also attack or reduce the victim's self-esteem and self-confidence. Classical conditioning can also be used with ambiguities. For example, the victim can be constantly bombarded with negativity or is led to the conclusion that past ambiguities also had a negative meaning. Because of the conditioning, the person will deduce or assume what is implied follows the same trend or pattern of negativity or theme. Conditioning your mind negatively or positively. Song lyrics often use ambiguities so that the listener can apply the lyrics to their own life or view on reality. Ambiguities can also be used to influence a person's view on reality or in combination with efforts to change a person's view on reality. Ambiguities, inducing self-doubt and attacks to self-confidence. A tactic that is often used to attack a person's self-confidence and to induce self-doubt is to ask a question using an ambiguity. When the person answers with a deduction or guess, a negative wrong or no is indicated and a more accurate re-question is provided with the correct answer. This is done repetitively to induce self-doubt and attack a person's self-confidence by having them believe that their conclusions or deductions are always false. Metaphorical speech, hidden threats and view on reality manipulation. Sometimes people will use metaphors and metaphorical speech to try to hide different threats or use words that are not obvious in their association to a threatening nature and try to reduce the risk of exposure or criminal evidence. The meaning of different words can also be changed, as with sarcasm. For example, if two people that hate each other are using the words "I love you," the intention and meaning of the words used do not have the same meaning or intention as the definition of the words. Metaphorical speech can also be used to change or manipulate the view on reality of a victim. For example, metaphorical speech can be used to describe a certain view on reality or belief that is not the actual reality in an attempt to manipulate the person. Ideation in suicide factors. The words profile, psychoanalyzed, We are going to fill you up in the sense of creating a bad or false psychological profile and using psychiatry as a threat. The victim is psychologically harassed and also bombarded with degrading themes, such as pedophilia for example, and combined with attempts to make the victims believe that they will be labeled a pedophile, sexually confused, or a violent, angry, and dangerous person. The truth and reality is that this tactic is used by the perpetrators in an attempt to protect themselves, discredit the victim, and prevent the victim from coming forward and exposing them. Another example is referring to the victim as an animal such as a dog. The attempts made by the victim to expose the perpetrators are then metaphorically described as trying to bite, like a dog, or eat the perpetrators. Using metaphors that are orally oriented are then redirected towards or used with degrading themes in attempts to prevent victims from continuing the behavior of trying to expose perpetrators. This example of the victim being metaphorically described as a dog can also imply or insinuate that the person is less than human and can be controlled by a master or as a slave. A better use of metaphors to describe the situation is that by trying to expose the perpetrators, the victim is using the light, exposure and visibility, and the perpetrators trying to use the darkness, deception and concealment. For example, a person can be led to believe that they are about to be fired or constantly on the verge of being fired to induce stress, paranoia, and insecurity. Another example is to lead the person to believe that they will be sued or going bankrupt, will be falsely accused resulting in prison time, will never be employed again. Used with degrading themes, the victim can be led to believe that they will be labeled a pedophile or used as a prostitute. That the perpetrators control the world and that the victim must obey. Beneficial intentions. To deceive victims. Some victims may not understand why someone would do this to them or how some people can do this to others, what the motives are for doing this to them, and therefore can be deceived into believing the phenomenon is of beneficial intentions. The phenomenon of psychological harassment or warfare can also leave the victims in doubt or confused as to what is going on or what is the intention or purpose of these psychological manipulations, psychological attacks, and events in question are for. Are the intentions in some way benevolent for training purposes or self-improvement? It can also leave the victim unaware that a psychological war is being waged on them, and the doubt, confusion, and deception can result in preventing the victims from taking action or fighting back. It's a test. It's training. It's to make you stronger or tougher. It's an initiation or rite of passage. Beneficial intentions. The failure strategy when a group with psychological warfare expertise targets a victim and tries to create situations, street theater, scenarios, or events with the intention of embarrassing, humiliating, threaten, anger, induce fear, or other harmful effects. They need a strategy to deal with the failure or failures if the events in question do not produce the desired outcome or result. A failure of a group who tries to intentionally attack or humiliate a victim builds confidence in the victim for overcoming this challenge or properly dealing with the event in question, so there is a need to have a strategy or tactic to eliminate or reduce the confidence-building phenomenon that results as much as possible. One of the ways this is done is by trying to make the victim believe the false view on reality or interpretation that it was a test, a training situation, and that there was or may have been some kind of benevolent intention in this kind of actions or scenario. Beneficial intentions. The never-ending test. One example for this strategy or tactic is to interpret the events as a test. The result is that the victim feels he is on a never-ending test, since these situations, events, and attacks are usually repetitive in this kind of ongoing psychological harassment or psychological war. Many of these tactics can also be considered to be psychological torture or used for psychological torture. The domination game. Who dominates? Some people may worry or have stress about who they believe they can dominate or dominate and who they may or may not dominate. The word or metaphors alpha male, as in wolf a pack, is also often used to describe a leader or someone in a leadership position. People in the workplace or in a relationship may continually try to dominate each other, causing conflicts and tensions. Domination can also be used as or in a psychological construction where a lot of importance is placed on who you dominate, and this can result in a lot of stress and difficulties for people who think in terms of domination or have the domination thing in their head. To remove this psychological construction or view on reality, you can simply view domination as you do not dominate anyone and no one dominates you. In the workplace, positions should be clearly defined as having authority or a leadership role. Employees need to fulfill their obligations as employees, and when people are in a relation, the relationship is supposed to be based on teamwork and usually does not involve one partner having authority over the other. Psychological warfare or manipulation. In cover-type investigations, individuals can use words, actions, and sounds that will make a target recall memories associated to a specific event. Observers can note different reactions from the target, such as fear, surprise, embarrassment, red face, anger, and different emotions. From these reactions, the observers can obtain clues to the level of involvement or knowledge that the target may have about a certain event. A simple example of this is if the targeted individual was involved in an event that has a specific location. The group can say the name of the location, like a street name. If the target does not associate this to anything or any memories, he will disregard the comments of strangers and have no reaction. If, however, the target does associate it to something, he may, or may not, have different reactions. This scenario may be repeated several times with different association pointers to get a better view or result. Like taking many measurements and obtaining some kind of average or again, a better view. This psychological manipulation scenario can also be used to stress, or panic, a target. And a possible motive would be to have them use some kind of telecommunication device, that the target believes to be secure, and to possibly push the target to communicate to a partner, that may also be involved in the event, where he would discuss the strange phenomenon that he believes is happening to him or discuss the events in question. It's a fact that in the US, Canada, and the UK there are secret organizations that listen to all telecommunications in these countries and that they also share information among themselves. Many people also believe that these organizations share information with other organizations indirectly or through indirect channels. There are many possible psychological manipulation type scenarios that can involve the use of sensitive information or dark secrets. You may have seen a movie where the bad guy says something like, "Get me some dirt on this guy." The information would be used to intimidate the target or induce fear, stress, and paranoia. This type of scenario can easily fall into the classification of blackmail, where the target is in a catch-22 situation. The target would have to reveal the sensitive information or dark secrets to law enforcement in order to obtain some kind of help or assistance. His claims could also simply be dismissed as paranoia or delusions. And even if his claims would happen to be believed, there simply would be no proof or evidence. Psychological warfare or using psychiatry in strong-arm tactics is not a new phenomenon, and it usually involves discrediting the target or having them declared psychologically ill. These tactics and technologies are usually used by powerful organizations. An example of this can be seen in the movie Blue Sky, set in the 1950s, where the army uses psychiatry to hospitalize and medicate the target. Psychological warfare: 3 top priorities or objectives: discredit or destroy the victim's credibility. Conceal psychological warfare knowledge. Eliminate the victim's means of subsistence or resources. Psychological warfare: some identified weapons psychiatry to attack the psychological integrity and credibility of victims. The weapon of degrading themes or pedophilia to use as a threat or to prevent exposure. The weapon of high levels of stress and sleep deprivation. The weapon of homelessness or eliminating a person's means of subsistence and financial resources. When psychiatry attacks the victim's psychological integrity and credibility, it makes the victim more vulnerable to the phenomenon or crime of criminal harassment or psychological warfare, and it also conceals the related knowledge. High levels of sleep deprivation can lead to macromineral deficiencies and acid-base disorders that can result in serious illnesses and even death. High levels of sleep deprivation can also be used to overwhelm the victim's body and lead to cancer. Psychological warfare, credibility. Psychological warfare is an invisible technology that deals with the mind, and destroying the victim's credibility in order to prevent exposure is a top priority. Destroying the victim's credibility also results in feelings or the belief of hopelessness. Advanced technology and psychological manipulation are also used to make the victim's claims more unbelievable or to make dismissing these claims easier or more justified. When a group or an organization engages in psychological harassment or warfare, they usually use tactics or operate in a way to discredit the victim or have the victim discredited by the medical community, notably psychiatry. Campaigns of disinformation or false information and information restrictions or isolation are usually used as well.